Okay, so we are testing this form pretty well now. We're able to say that, hey, when we click this button, that the form on submit has been called. Now, what we're not testing is to make sure that the form is called with any sort of actual information. For instance, let's go ahead and test to make sure that the form, when it's submitted, right, when we click the button, to have been called with is what we're looking to have been called with. And this is going to accept what we think the values that the form was called with. And we suspect that this was called with a text property inside of an object with an empty string. And if you were to guess that, you would have guessed correctly because as you can see, our test passed. If we were to do something like hi, you could see that, well, it's going to fail. So right now the test or the text is a blank string. Now you might be wondering why that is. Well, if we look at our form, what's happening is we're pulling text from this .state and we're passing into onSubmit form, and we have a default state for our text. This is all good. But what we don't have yet is we don't have any sort of, updating logic for having a controlled component. Many times in React, you end up having what's called a controlled component. Now, a controlled component is great for using and controlling your data, but what about testing? For instance, what if we wanted to modify one of these inputs? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to first create a new label. Now this label is going to be for this text, and which of its name is going to be text, not texts, but text. Next, we need an ID on this thing, and we need it to be an ID of text. Now, typically, you're going to want to have some sort of onChange method, and if we were to have a whole bunch of inputs, you would create a generic one. Since this is just a single text form, I'm not going to bother with it. For this, I'm simply just going to have an onChange, and we're going to set the value based on this. We're going to do E as in the event, and then we're going to this.set state, and we're going to set the state of text equal to e.target.value. Now, again, you might be used to seeing this as a method and then even a generic method where we have an on update or an on change method. I'm doing it this way just to save time. We have one input and it's being managed by this simple set state. Let's go ahead and update our snapshot because we added some new stuff here. Again, now you're finally seeing what I was mentioning before about snapshots being a little annoying when you're just updating your code, right? But it's okay. It's a known change here, so we're going to want to accept that by just selecting our terminal, hitting the U key. And what we should expect to see now is after we change the value of our input, we should expect to see the form called. So let's go ahead and expect this to be called with hello. But first, let's go ahead and change the value of hello. To do that, we're going to go ahead and need to grab the input, and we're going to do that by get by label text. We have a label. The label has the text value. Let's go ahead back to our form. The label is going to have the text value of text. Let's go ahead and console log this out here. Let's select you to approve my snapshot. Again, a little annoying. What we can do is just do a simple console.log, and we can get label by text with the string of text, and we can do outer HTML to see if we have the right item. Which you can see we do, it's outputting a input type text with ID of text. Cool. So we've definitely gotten our right item here. So let's go ahead and remove this log from this, and we just want to get that item. Okay, we want to get this item. Let's actually do this above the submit form, right? We want to submit our form after we've added something to our text. So we're going to get by label text. We're going to get the text, and instead of the outer HTML, we're going to set the value, right? And we're going to say, hey, the value of this thing, the value is now going to be equal to hello, and we can save this. Now, this is curious because, hey, we set the value of the input, we fired the submit, and we would have expected that hello would come in here now considering we changed the value. You might be thinking, well, React would have gotten that value, it would have fired an on change, and it would have updated the state. But it doesn't. So maybe we need to fire an on change. Maybe that's the solution here. And that on change could be fired on the input itself. And maybe that on change event is going to trigger a set state with the new state. So let's go ahead and do a fire event, and notice how we'll have a change event, and we're going to fire a change event on the get by label text, so on our input here. And just like this, it looks like things have been working. Now, this is pretty good. I should mention that I personally, if you hear the surprise in my voice that this is working, because this wasn't working a couple of days ago. And in fact, I know Kent C. Dodds had just pushed a new update to fix this behavior, but he fixed it with a new syntax. As far as I know, I didn't check though, as far as I know, this particular syntax wasn't necessarily supposed to be working yet. But as you can see, my tests are passing and the onSubmit is being called after we fired the change event. So this is fantastic. If you're seeing green here and it's expecting this, let's change this to hi so that I can tell that I'm not dreaming here, that this is in fact working. This is amazing because in my own work just a day ago, this wasn't working. Granted, I only tried the new syntax because I was only expecting the new syntax to work. But the new syntax is actually a little bit more concise here, because what we're doing is first we're finding the input and setting the value, then we're firing a change on it. This new syntax that we're going to be using, let's have a little note here. Note might not work. Okay. What we do have is a different syntax that allows us to do the same thing in sort of one fell swoop. And what we can do is a fire event dot change. And in this event, what we can do is pass in once more the target, which is the get by label text. And this time it allows us to pass in some things to this change event. For instance, we want to say, well, there's going to now be an object in here that contains a target with another object that has a value that has the value we want to change this to. You'll notice if I have this be to hi, you can see that the input update was submitted correctly with hi, even though we're looking for hello. If I change this to hello, this works again. Now, for me, this syntax is nice. We're setting the value and then running a change event. I guess that's fine. This syntax is a little bit nicer. We're firing a change event. It's more like you're typing it in and we're setting what the value of the target is. And that's clearly updating the state. And again, this is guaranteed to work. I'm not entirely positive this will work for you every time here. But look at this. We have now added this input here and we have been able to check that this form is in fact going to submit with the values that we were expecting this to submit. Now, if you have a whole bunch of these, you can do a whole bunch of change events and set the text and tell it to be what it's expecting to look for. So this is exactly how I personally run my tests. I typically have a form component that's a generic form component, and then I pass in an onSubmit prop. So in this particular instance, when I test those components, I create a spy function here, a mocked function, a fake function that spies on how many times it's been clicked and with what. And then I expect that that has been run a certain amount of times and that it has been run with the correct information or the information that we're expecting it to have. That way, if at some point I come in here and I'm working on this form and I fudge something like this, you can see that everything sort of breaks. There's now no text property. It's not being submit correctly. Okay, we can save this. Or maybe I come in here and this dot target and I change this to texts in here and set the state here. Ooh, and now it's broken again. So you can see that this is a really good indicator that something is wrong, at least with your form, and that it's not submitting with the correct data. Okay, so this is how we test form inputs. We do update fire events on a change input. This is something that was pretty difficult, and it's a little bit more difficult with other libraries like Enzyme because you're testing the state. And remember, when we test our components, we want to test them as how people are actually using them, as in this on submit is being called with the right data. We don't care what the state is set to. I mean, we do care because that ultimately is what makes the thing work, but we don't want to test the platform, right? We don't want to test to make sure that React is doing its job. So we don't need to test that state is being set correctly. What we need to test is that the function is being submitted with the correct data. Okay, it's a weird small distinction, but it's part of what this library stands on as a whole, is that what you're testing for is how your users are using the website, and that's a big deal. And that's not necessarily a thing that you get out of any other testing library, really. So this is one of the reasons why a ton of people have loved this library. Okay, so what we're going to be doing in the next couple of videos is diving into some more tests, some real world stuff, because we've been testing our movie forms and our counters, the stuff that we've sort of just built for this series. But what about the other stuff? What about the real stuff? We built this application, or if you took the level 1 or the React 16 for Everyone course, we built this application with a movies list and with a movie detail page and a movie page. How do we test this stuff? How does this stuff get correctly tested? Well, let's go ahead and we're going to dive into all of this. For instance, we're going to show you the process of creating some mock data, which is something we haven't necessarily done. We're going to be talking about testing with React Router. We're going to be testing nested components. We're going to be testing API calls. We're going to be getting into some real world stuff here, okay? So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.